Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report. Now, pretty big week this week. A few things came out, and as usual, we'll start with some news in Syria. So, let me just get our map up here. The usual events. Now, one thing you'll notice here in the eastern corner of the Syrian map is there's been a resurgence of ISIS. They've claimed responsibility for the assassination of some low level SDF leaders. They've had attacks in like the northeast, and Turkish operations seem slowly but surely to be resuming. So, what we pretty much expected last week, Russia was saying we expected the Turkish operations to resume, and we don't necessarily have a problem with it, but keep it within reason. So, more of the same, of course. No new Israeli strikes after their failure with the two of three missiles getting shot down, two or four missiles. But point being, either way, that's not too good. But they've held off for a while. Israel's been pretty quiet on the Syrian front after a couple of active weeks, and we'll get into some of the Netanyahu stuff with his internal problems in a couple minutes here. But I would say the biggest news out of Syria, which was, I wouldn't say broken by one Tucker Carlson, but definitely brought to prominence, is the fact that leaked documents from the OPC, it's the OPCW, that's what it is, pretty much revealed that the 2018 chemical attack that was blamed on Assad amounted to a total hoax. So that was interesting because the original report, the official report, said they were dropped from aircraft, so it had to be a state actor, and what other state actor than Bashar al-Assad? But this leaked report said we have a strong suspicion these weapons were deployed on the ground by a small group, and it contradicted every narrative you heard about the 2018 attack, which means, as Tucker Carlson pointed out, not to ride his coattails too much, what happened in Syria, we bombed them over a completely false allegation. Now, this, of course, isn't the first time. We said this pretty much as soon as it happened. Many people said
Yeah.
it as soon as it happened. I mean, hell, even Tucker himself wanted to say it. He said it as much as he could, as much as a Fox News host could say it. But it just reveals that as time goes on, they admit we're right. Conspiracy theories become fact, and I all I can do is laugh because look, I knew sooner or later they were going to have to admit this. Now, of course, it was through a leaked document, but I figured they would tacitly admit it. They would come out and say what they, for example, like what James Mattis did during the 2017 attack, and said we still don't have sufficient proof that Assad used chemical weapons. It went beyond that to the point where they say, yeah, he pretty much didn't. So. Interesting developments out of Syria. I'm surprised, honestly, Israel didn't bomb them over that to draw attention away from that. I am.
Yeah, the Guardian ran a story with Patrick Wintower about how well, some of those findings were misrepresented. I mean, they're already in damage control right now. But at the end of the day, their measurements for chlorine in the atmosphere that they had done to do these checks regularly showed no increased amount of chlorine on the day of the attack or the week prior. So, you can claim, up and down that there was still an attack or it was chemical, but it just doesn't show up. So, whatever nuggets that they can find to perpetuate the idea that an OPCW agent is always trustworthy and is not culpable in government machinations to topple regimes. Well, that's false, right? And this should also be applied to these officials when it comes to the war in Ukraine, when it comes to the downing of the MH17 and so on, right? They can be bribed. They can lie. And if it really wasn't for like actual whistleblowers, not like the crap that's going on with the impeachment right now, um, people would still believe it. But in a sense, people have stopped believing it. Even if, like, WikiLeaks does do one thing, it kind of it reconfirms a lot of people's suspicions, right? Um, the libs in the EU and in America might ask for an invasion uh, of Syria, but it's tacit. It's not. They're not really behind it. Like there's a few exceptions, but overall, they're not really serious. It is just virtue signaling. It's not. You know, nothing's going to happen. And in a way, Trump's half-hearted lobs of some missiles that over half were intercepted anyways. Um, isn't fooling anybody. In a way, that also kind of reaffirms. It's just happened too often, right? I mean, they've been caught faking gas attacks for so long now that the only way the I wish it were true narrative exists in Call of Duty. Where the white helm, if the white helmets will tell you the truth of what happened in this video game, like their truth literally lives in this virtual space, right? And it's definitely for normies. It's definitely for the uninitiated, or it's definitely whoever has an axe to grind with Blum or whatnot. But yeah, this is damning, and it's again WikiLeaks comes through, and it's raised their status again.
Yeah, and I would say it's much needed, especially after the recent events with Assange. I would say it's more uh, overzealousness than I'm saying. Assange is not in good health. He's likely going to die soon. They've been telling us that for years. He's clearly not in good health, but I mean, I think if he's going to die, it's going to be because
Mhm.
he Epstein's himself. But that's aside the point. But it does give them a good boost because they haven't had a major drop in a while. They haven't had a major drop in, I would say, a couple years now. Definitely, they've had some since 2016 election, but not many. So I'll say that. So good for them, uh, and thank you for Tucker Carlson to bring this to light to, I would say, the average American, and because a lot of people they wouldn't take the time to think about this, they wouldn't take the time to uh, even question this. Most of them, again, can't even find Syria on a map. Most of them do not think about Syria even on a weekly basis like we do. And this shows a bit of a niche as judging by the audience size. But you know what? We appreciate each and every one of you, and we hope to come back this week and next week, and for as long as we do the show. But with the feet kissing out of the way, I there's not much news out of Syria beyond the big bombshell. Now, of course, in the coming weeks, I expect them to start um, getting in a tizzy about the Kurds again, saying, "Oh, we must save the SDF." And I'm gonna come out and make a prediction. I think that they're gonna pull this one. Time Magazine is gonna say the Syrian Kurds. They're gonna give them the Person of the Year slot.
Well, I mean, just to expand on this, I don't know if you know, but Martina Navratilova, there's no Czechoslovakia now, but there it was at one time. Most famous lesbian tennis player came out against Tucker Carlson and asked, "Please enlighten us why you're for Russia." Um, and it's funny, uh, you know, in some ways, Tucker is he's revealing his power because according to the Guardian, in June, Carlson personally phoned Trump and told him not to commit any strikes against Iran. So,
Yeah, and you'll recall whenever there's any major crisis in the world, pretty much he spends the entire week talking to Doug McGregor, who, of course, Colonel Douglas McGregor, who I would say is probably the best foreign policy expert in this country. I'm willing to say at that point more than even some of the more libertarian minded people. Which, despite my disagreements with the libertarians, one thing they're really solid on is the foreign policy. I would say McGregor goes beyond that. But yeah, Tucker, he's been catching a lot of flack, and we'll talk about him a little bit with the Russia thing. But of course, yeah, you see these blue checks on Twitter, no matter what they're famous for, not even anything political. It's like, oh, Tucker Carlson, he's working for the Russians. He's revealing his hand, but
mhm.
yeah, just more the usual drivel. Now, a little bit of news out of Iran. They are conducting massive military drills that simulate the invasion of Iran. Now, this includes the rapid deployment of missiles, artilleries. Now, the way the media will try to paint this, if they even cover this, that is that they're planning some go at the Persian Gulf. They're doing some war games where they're going to seize control of the Strait of Hormuz and seize control of all these oil tankers and start World War III by lobbing one of the very many nukes they have at Israel. Those nukes they've definitely developed since Trump pulled out of the Iran deal, or depending on who you ask, because of the Iran deal, they developed them again. Pick your preferred mainstream news outlet, but that again. But I think if the media covers this, you're going to put a lot more stock in it than it needs to be. I mean, they run these drills every year. Iran has been preparing for invasion since 1979. They come out and say this. They say we've been waiting for this war. This war is inevitable. It'll come. We'll try to prevent it, but we believe it's inevitable. Now, of course, the rhetoric changes with Iranian leaders, and depending on which current person in Iran is speaking. For example, Soleimani is much more aggressive, despite the fact he says he wants to avoid conflict. Then you get the Ayatollah, who's, I would say, pretty much a hardliner when it comes to any negotiations. Whereas you get Rouhani, who's a bit more conciliatory, but I would say it's more on the U.S. part at this point, not by much. Again, he'll talk to other Western or Westernized powers, for example, France, Japan, Germany, etc., and probably would talk to the U.S. if, again, there was more reliability in the Trump administration. Hell, maybe if Pompeo goes, that we'll get those negotiations. I mean, people have been saying for a long time, yeah, Bolton and Pompeo were the biggest stumbling blocks to this. We got rid of one, let's see the other. And, I won't get into it in this show because I don't think there's enough to go on. But there's apparently some feuds between Trump and Pompeo behind closed doors, which doesn't surprise me, but I do. I do think it's worth pointing out, especially with the recent tensions, especially about a month ago at this point, almost 2 months ago, we were talking about uh, Iran is not pleased with Turkey. They're not pleased with its operation in northeastern Syria, and they're threatening military action. Even though I doubt they're going to take it, they're still threatening it. But I still think it's worth noting. And again, we've seen these war games play out. We've seen them on the U.S. side, even as recently as 2002, 2003, where the United States loses badly to Iran in a defensive war. Of course, defensive on Iran's part. The Millennium Challenge 2002, I believe it is 2002 or 2003. But point being is Iran is running military drills, and again, I speculate that the media will try to paint this like they're gearing up for some invasion of Iraq or the Strait of Hormuz, or planning to destroy Israel as they usually paint it.
Yeah, I mean, the possibility of a war with Iran has, in a sense, reopened, and a lot of that is also because both Netanyahu and Trump are on the ropes. Um, it wouldn't be the first time a president, a leader of a nation, has pointed to another enemy rather than the enemies he's fighting in his own country, in order to divert attention. You know, Bush did this. You could even argue Obama was doing this in 2011 with Libya, because his approval rating wasn't that great. And so, anyways, there's been other leaders who have done something like this. Now, is it really going to happen? I'm still skeptical because, um, I mean, the stakes are becoming higher and higher. And I don't know how that's going to be averted. China's influence and its dependence on oil is immeasurable, right? Their influence in the last 20 years has skyrocketed. They're trading with more countries than America was 20 years ago. Um, so, in a way, you could argue that America is already in an isolationist mode, even if it's not the way we pictured it.
No, I've said this before, but I said that during these impeachment proceedings, Trump may do what Bill Clinton did and pick a Middle Eastern country to bomb, which again would most likely be either Syria or Iraq, in order to distract from it. Because you recall Bill Clinton did this with Iraq. Um,
Yugoslavia, it's Serbia, yeah.
yeah, and he did it with multiple countries. Of course, the United States had much more power to throw around at the time, and things have significantly decreased since then. But I could, Trump, I think is less likely because with the election coming up and with how, again, volatile things are. But Netanyahu, I think, has more maneuverability with this, if you will, to the point where, yeah,
Yeah.
he could lob some strikes at definitely Syria and probably Iran in order to say, look at how I'm securing the Israeli people, look how I'm protecting the nation. Now, I think it's more likely, if anything, he'll turn his guns on Gaza and Palestine in general. I could see him really pushing the settlements, and we already have the U.S. Uh, de facto recognizing the West Bank settlements. So again, I think he'll focus close to home, saying, "Oh, we have to take out Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, if anything." But I do see your point. I do see the point that oh, Iran could be at risk because both of their leaders are under investigation. With that, I think we should get into the Netanyahu stuff.
Sure, go ahead.
Now, Netanyahu is under investigation. Now, this has been a long time coming. People have speculated this. He's staved it off many times, and people speculate the fact that he keeps on seeking re-election is the fact that once he's back in civilian life, he loses some of the immunities that come with office, which it makes sense. Now I don't think those same immunities would be afforded to him, even as just an MP, a member of the parliament. I think it's specifically the executive office that would protect him from that. But I mean, again, they've gotten his wife, they've indicted his wife, and people are putting the heat on him. Now, my initial reaction to this is good. Let him burn, let him suffer, let him be thrown into a cell. But I have seen from some people the narrative that Netanyahu going down would be bad for a broader anti-globalist narrative because Netanyahu, okay, he's of course an ultra-Zionist. He wields that influence in the West in other countries, but he is an enemy of people like Soros, like these more globalistic organizations. He isn't on too good of terms with more liberal Western leaders or the European Union, and him going down may embolden the, I guess, say globalist establishment, saying we could take down a powerful, I wouldn't say populist, a powerful nationalist leader in Israel. We can do it anywhere now. Now, again, I somewhat buy into that, but I think what at the end of the day, it's not going to make any difference because okay, you get someone like a Benny Gantz, like the center right party. It's does it again. Pretty much they'll do the same thing in regard to their foreign policy. It's just the fact one will be slightly more conciliatory to the Palestinians, and one will be more friendly to the liberals and less overtly nationalistic and Zionistic on the world stage. I mean, yeah, Gantz, I doubt he'd stand behind something like the nation state law. Now, he may stand behind it because it already passed and already exists, but I can definitely see the argument, but I don't think it holds enough water, and I would still like to see Netanyahu go.
Right. Also, I think the backdrop that we've been seeing developing over the last 2 years, especially when Netanyahu is will cozy up to Putin or cozy up to Orban and several other nationalists so on. Um, it is ultimately it's a sort of American and British CivNat turning point USA kind of stance, right? Those muzzies are really bad. We really got to do something about them, and so he is against Soros and so on. And of course, the division is where does it lie? Well, it lies that for most Jews, America is the promised land. That's Israel, and not necessarily Israel in the Middle East. While they may tacitly approve of it or disapprove of it, or they're glad it's there anyways, they're not going to move there. And I think that's where the division is, that certain members of of say the globalist elite who happen to be Jewish see a much better promise about expanding their power and influence on a global setting rather than Israel, right? Bibi might be looking at it from a nationalist point of view, in so much as that he, on some level, of course, he does love Israel. He does. I think even if you take the Holocaust away, I think he wants that land. He wants there to always be in Israel, and I think he looks at the subversion that Soros is already trying to do with regards to and succeeded in Ukraine, but also with Hungary and Poland, that is going to be Israel's fate. So I mean, so there is something substantial to this, right? But how does it affect European nationalists or even American nationalists? Well, not very much. I mean, he's not going to do anything for you. Like he might make some nationalists feel better. Well, at least he's better than Soros, but ultimately there's no real bonus from working with him. I don't see it. Is he pledging money? Is he, it's what exactly is he doing? Um, how different, like, uh, you know what I mean? I think
Yeah,
he can be sincere. I don't deny that he's sincere, or that he's of a generation that sees things differently. I'm not saying that, but what are the actual benefits on the ground? What is he lobbying? Right? Like, um, he's he's bombed Syria over 1,000 times in 5 years. That's driving the amount of refugees that keep entering Turkey and the rest of Europe. Like, what are the benefits? How is he really working with European nationalists? And I don't see it.
I would agree with what you say, but I would also say I think the argument that a lot of these people are making is a domino theory sort of thing, where if he can be toppled, the rest of them can be toppled. Now, again, I think we've seen domino theory not pan out enough in order to discredit it, but I can understand the concern at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand it. I mean, certain parts of Israel, of course, very liberal. So, um, like I say, I think his fear is sincere. I don't think this is some 4D chess. Of world Jewry is doing this. I think he's actually very sincere about this. Now, this is besides his whatever criminality may be true or not true about him and his wife and so on. I think he is sincere about it, but I don't. What are the real benefits
Yeah,
except having a Jewish guy from Israel that agrees with you about nationalism, but isn't doing like concrete things to like. I mean, is he reprimanding Jews in Germany that fund those lifeboats to get more Africans into Germany? Like, have I ever seen him do something like that?
no, no,
Has
but
he has he promised to take care of any of it? I mean, it's just whatever.
yeah, and I do like how you point out that a lot of diaspora in the West, especially in the United States, are not fans of Netanyahu or the Likud party. Not that they're necessarily anti-Israel; they're just anti-Netanyahu and want a more liberal governance power. They want Israel to be a giant Tel Aviv. They want that for the entire country, as
Right,
opposed to
right.
the more.
And on that level, they are dangerous on that level, right? Um, especially for conservative Jews. So, I mean, and of course, I mean, we on this show, of course, despise George Soros. So, um, on some level, of course, I empathize with Netanyahu on this, um, because I think of the world is that Soros and the like are attempting to bring in is a far worse world.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, and especially since it hasn't panned out, I would take Netanyahu occasionally agitating for war with Iran or saying Iran is building nuclear weapons and U.S. to pledge to defend us over a lot of the more globalistic open borders type things that Soros supports. Not that either are ideal, and that frankly I reject both, but I'm just saying I think in the long term one is significantly less damaging than the other. But moving on from
Mm-hmm.
that, we have some news about Ukraine, Russia, and the like. Now, I'll start out again with our good friend Tucker Carlson, who I would show the clip, but again, these mainstream media outlets can be so fickle with copyright things. I'm not going to risk it for a 5 second clip, but he has He always brings on people who disagree with him. He always brings on, almost sort of punching bags. I'm not going to say he does deliberately. It's just that the people he gets aren't the brightest, uh, and they were arguing over the Ukraine thing, over the withholding of aid, and the broader issue in general. And Tucker Carlson said, "Why should I care about a feud between Ukraine and Russia? At this point, I'm rooting for the Russians."
uh,
Now he did somewhat back down because at the end of his show he said, "Of course I was joking. I only support America." Now I wouldn't say it was like a full back down because what they probably wanted him to say is like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was joking. Of course I support the Ukrainian people in their struggle for freedom." What he said is, "I don't care about their conflict. America first." At the end of the day, what pretty much the conservative movement is shifting towards, but yeah, it wasn't a full backtrack and probably something he genuinely believed. I don't think Tucker Carlson. I don't think his primary concern is an Eastern European border dispute.
yeah, no, I don't think so. The only sort of fly in the ointment is that, of course, the lib journalists, of course, are going to say, well, you remember when Blumf said that he hopes WikiLeaks and the Russians have more dirt on Hillary, right? It's going to fit that narrative, right? Wait a minute, whose side are you on? I think the bigger story is that America is very, very divided right now, and it's ironic that it's happening at a time maybe where they're less able to bring to fruition whatever their geopolitical lens that they have in mind. Uh, yeah, I mean, I, I don't know how serious Tucker was about actually joking or not. I think on some level he was, simply because angering them is such a wonderful feeling that a lot of people can't help it. It's his form of shit posting.
Yeah, I definitely, and I think he probably did it to get under their skin. But I think at the end of the day, he's of the same opinion as a lot of us. Ukraine is a foreign aid black hole. I would say even worse than Israel because Israel, you can at least make some military industrial complex argument with the fact that they buy our arms, they benefit the war industry and our economy. Whereas Ukraine, they're just a massive black hole of aid that's of no real value, even to the neoliberals and neoconservatives. I mean, look, from a German perspective, in exploited Ukraine, they get the farmland and stuff. But from the neoliberal neoconservative perspective, without Crimea, Ukraine means nothing to them. They don't get the ports. They don't get control of the Black Sea. So at the end of the day, it means nothing. So I
Right, and that guest said, Tucker said, "Why should I care?" And he's, because it's democracy. And Tucker laughed and said, "I don't care." Um, so there's a real pragmatism that is set in. More and more people actually don't care about democracy, and they're talking about not necessarily a theoretical democracy. They're talking about the witnessed historical democracy that they've lived, right? And that's ultimately more important. Um, so I think that that should be kept in mind too. Um, Plus, with with the whole, as you say, they need a ton of aid, and I think the guest or others have mentioned that Ukraine is worth defending, right? And and again, it has this very moral and virtuous tone, and this is it's our duty to defend poor Ukraine. It's the same sort of British 19th century St. George thing about saving little countries. Every little country deserves its own nationalism. Totally doesn't have to do with empires that are competing with you, and so it's that same kind of mindset. And somehow, so Ukraine has to be safe, but Ukraine's entire agricultural infrastructure has been sold off. Saved from what? And saved for whom?
yeah, and
Right? I mean, it's such a joke.
okay, let's just make the argument that Russia walks in and annexes Ukraine tomorrow, all the entire country. At the end of the day, yes, of course. I mean, Ukraine's already Russian dominated. Let's not kid ourselves here. But Ukrainian farmers would work their own farmland. Ukrainian businesses, the Ukrainian people would still control the land that at least they call Ukraine. Under Western domination, that's not going to be the case. They're going to be little more than servants to whatever Western multi-billion-dollar corporation or organization or whatever they're calling themselves wills. Like again, not that I really even care, but not to paint Russia as some like greater moral power. But at the end of the day, they're more blunt and overt and traditional about their imperialism, where it's like, yeah, okay, you conceded, we'll let you keep a bit of your dignity.
Yeah, I mean, if it, if it's not obvious to some, because if it's not obvious to some, the truth is, uh, R Russia ever since the 50s, like shortly after World War II, Russia on a regular basis dealt with terrorism from Ukraine, and this was part of Gladio One operations that were not just happening in Eastern Europe, but they were also happening in Italy and the Netherlands and other places. And it was basically, NATO and the US took on the side of the fascists because they were against the Soviet Union. And of course, they don't in any meaningful capacity, they're not with them any longer. Basically because Eastern Europe has been taken, wrested away from Russia. So the idea that Russia wants all of Ukraine is so preposterous because they would have to deal with that all over again. And that's just not something that they can afford to do.
Yeah, I think
It,
ideally they just want to. I think ideally, of course, they got Crimea, but they want the eastern Russian part of Ukraine, and they want to leave a rump state of western Ukrainians. Hell, I think they'd even let them keep Kiev at this point.
oh yeah, no, they have no intention of ever getting even Kiev. That's just not in it.
Yeah, and I'm gonna take a bit of a long stretch here, especially if the current climate with Ukraine continues. If anything, I think it'll be the Ukrainians crawling back to the Russians rather than Russian aggression that reunites the two.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
I think it's going to be the Ukrainians crawling back to the Russians that reunites them rather than Russia being forceful about it.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, that's a possibility. I also see that in some ways that moment has passed, primarily because Ukraine has so many Western interests now. It's been bought up by so many Western powers that how close can it ever really afford to be with Russia? In many ways, Ukraine is a thorn in Russia right now. I think in 10 years we will have to reconsider that question. Uh, I don't know if Ukraine is ever going to come back to Russia.
Well,
I, I, I'm,
I think a big part of this, we've touched on this a lot. The population exodus now, of course, the Russophone Ukrainians will go to Russia. They'll resettle there, or they'll push for secession towards Russia, as we saw in Crimea, as we saw in the Donbass. Where again, as the Western Ukrainians, the ones who are more, I would say, proper Ukrainians, are either going to stick it out or go to Poland or the Germany or the U.S.
yeah, yeah. I mean that's still sort of what's happening on the ground. Yeah, but I mean, I think the overall Western strategy is still not dead. It's literally, buy everything up around Russia, put in so much Western interests in it that eventually these countries have to comply with what the West wants. Essentially, their hatred towards Russia will eventually despoil them of their own sovereignty, and you see this happening in Poland as well, not just in Ukraine, but it's exacerbated in Ukraine. And Ukraine is at a very rapid pace.
Yeah, I actually do have a story about the Poland issue. Actually, Polish general coming out and pretty much saying what you said. But yeah, the thing is, maybe I'm stuck in an old worldview. Maybe I'm still stuck in the 19th century. But I don't see the long-term viability of a Ukrainian state, even as a puppet state. I don't see how it can exist. I can see at some point, again, this may be way far off in the future, a partition between, of course, the Russian part would go to Russia, and various Eastern European countries taking back chunks of Ukraine that historically belonged to them. I could see that at some point in the future.
It's possible, but I think that's a very different world
Yeah,
than the one that we have
like I
now.
said, I think that's several decades off, if anything. I don't see that
Yeah,
happening like in 2030, or for example.
no, I don't either.
Yeah, but again, I think the country will be on a downward spiral until it eventually doesn't exist. Now, how long that takes is anyone's guess. Now, keeping on the Ukraine issue, this is from an official press release from the office of the Russian president, and it's a telephone conversation with President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. Now, I'm just going to read this verbatim because it's only a couple sentences here. In view of the Normandy Format Summit, scheduled to take place on December 9th, 2019, in Paris, Vladimir Putin had a telephone conversation with President of Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky at the Ukrainian side's initiative. The two presidents touched upon the situation with the transfer of three warships used by the Kiev used by Kiev in the provocation near the Kerch Strait in November 2018. Gas issues, including the continuation of gas transit and the resumption of direct Russian gas supplies to Ukraine, were discussed in detail. It was agreed to maintain contacts at various levels. So, even though this was a simple phone conversation that was reported to have lasted about, I think, an hour, this is still the most in depth Russian Ukrainian diplomacy we've had since the Maidan. They haven't had this in depth. I mean, I don't think they even still have ambassadors to each other's country at this point. I don't think they've had that since 2014. So, this is definitely mending. This is definitely rebuilding bridges that were burnt after the Maidan. I mean, a lot of people saw Zelensky rightfully as an unknown quantity. Is he going to sell his country to the West? Is he going to try to reconcile with Russia? What's he going to do here? Now, early on, and I would say even still, it looks like yes, he was going to sell his country to the West. But now we're starting to see him reconcile with Russia. I'm starting to wonder whether he's has this grander strategy of playing both sides, which, judging by his intellect, probably not, or if he thinks he took it too far in the Western direction and is trying to step back a few by cozying up to the Russians. I think that's probably more likely.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, well, I mean, what's looming is Ukraine's gas deal with Russia. Um, that's very close at hand. So I see him pragmatically choosing to working with Russia because there's basically no choice. He has to, right? The West has not provided something that can compete with what Russia is offering. So I think that plays a very huge role. Ultimately, you could even argue that Donbass is always going to be a playing card in Russia's hand for negotiations. You know, I might withdraw. I might leave Donbass. You might have it back if so on and so forth. So yeah, that's what I see here. There's a pragmatism going on. Um, this relationship or however smooth or rocky it might be going forward is going to be the same regardless, I think, of whether Trump is going to be reelected or not. Like, this is an issue that sidesteps and goes beyond like who's ever leading America. It's not to say that America won't make an impact. They will, but this relationship is not going to fundamentally change until America can actually, deliver energy in such a comprehensive way and at such an effective cost as Russia can. So,
Now, I'm glad
and,
you brought that
and
up.
they're not. They can't do it. So,
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm going to go on a bit of a stretch. I think, despite the fact that Trump is still in office and will likely be in office through 2025, I think he'll probably get reelected looking at the current Democratic field. I still think geopolitics has still entered a post Trump age. I think it's beyond him that even if he were to be impeached or die tomorrow, drop dead of a heart attack or a stroke, as a 70 something year old man could likely do, I don't think it would make a difference having Mike Pence or one of the nameless, faceless Democrats in the White House. I think he has shaken things up so much, and things have been shaken up so much on the world stage that the amount now, no, America is nowhere near being deposed as the sole superpower of the world, at least for now. but they've lost so much power and influence that a lot of the things that are in motion now will not be stopped by a Biden in the White House, by a Warren, by a Mike Pence, by any of these other establishment Republicans or Democrats. It's too late for that.
Right, and attempts to do so to again change course 180 degrees, as what has happened with Trump in power, will not build confidence. It'll erode it. You know, here's we were discussing earlier off air that the Senate is trying to pass a resolution to bring sanctions to any country that is working with Nord Stream 2. These will be, ostensibly European countries, Norwegian, German, what have you, and possibly even countries that are working. So, can you imagine? So, America, because of course, no one sanctions more people around the world than America. So, to stop this inevitability from happening, they're going to throw sanctions on them. Remember, America is going to throw sanctions on Turkey. Well, today Turkey was testing the new S-400s with American F-16 fighter jets. Like, if that doesn't tell you how much the world has changed, like literally, they just couldn't care less. You're right. I mean, in a way, the credibility has been lost. They were on a knife's edge. They had a good run from Bush Senior to Clinton and Bush Junior, but how long are people? People aren't going to buy the whole democracy line, right? We all know what this is really, especially after 25 years of really savage and financially crippling wars. No one actually believes this is about democracy, right? Like, it's ridiculous to presume so.
Yeah, I mean, we're at the
So,
point where between the recession, between the massive wars America has caused in the Middle East, not just America solely, but point stands, things were more stable under a dual polar United States versus Soviet Union brink of nuclear war world than they were on the end of history freedom and democracy era.
right, right. So, yeah, I agree with you. Even if Trump is not reelected, this has been such a fly in the ointment, not to use that phrase, that like it's spoiled the process. There's too many things in motion now, and you can see that India and Saudi Arabia are also buying the latest Russian S-400 systems. They're working on also delivering this to Iran, and we say this because Iran has had its largest missile defense testing and operation take place this week. So, yeah, just one thing I'd like to add to further this. Turkey has come out against a new resolution in NATO about further establishing more NATO troops in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland in case of a Russian attack. And Turkey is going to stand by it. And the reason they're going to stand by it is what they want in return is compliance by the U.S. and by Russia, but especially by the U.S. with regards to NATO, to fulfill their role in the agreement with the Kurds and the relocation of the Kurds in Syria. So, there's 29 countries in NATO. If Turkey was like Montenegro in this, or Slovenia or Croatia, no one would care.
Or even Hungary, which I think
Or
Hungary
even
might
Hungary,
might
yeah.
latch themselves onto this because they have a chance to work with a larger NATO partner in order to get something that they probably want. Of course, because Hungary has been very conciliatory towards the Russians. Now, if they have Turkey with their back, they could build a coalition. Now, I don't think it will go as far as other populous countries. Definitely not Poland. Italy, I think you're stretching it still a little bit, but you could get a couple more on there. But yeah, this could be something that really, I wouldn't say outright destroys NATO, at least not yet. But this could be something that drives a massive wedge through it more than is already happening now.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no confidence, basically. I mean, it's 70% of the troops and the armaments in NATO are American, and this is on the European continent in Turkey. Like, I mean, everybody knows this is an American operation, right? So Europeans aren't invested in it. Americans are upset because that is, they feel that that's thankless and so on. You need to sell more military hardware for the complex and so on. But you know, Trump has to shame them into doing this, or threaten, to dissolve NATO or whatever. Or, prognosticate about its eventual demise and so on. Um, Anyhow, yeah. So you know, Turkey again is in the headlines and is using its ability to go left and right, east and west. Again,
Yeah. Now, you did bring this up earlier, and as I said, a Polish general seconded your claim that these countries are selling themselves because of an ethnic feud with Russia. So, a Polish general by the name of, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Wojciechowski, I'll just spell that for the audience. That's Wojciechowski. Now, of course, he's.
Wojciechowski.
Say that again for the audience?
I think it's Wojciechowski, and like Wojciech, like Wojnik. It means like a soldier or like a warrior.
Ah, so he's probably from an intergenerational sort of military family, judging by that name. In that case, I mean, considering the fact, I mean, he's a general. I mean, are we looking at the new warlord of Poland? Hopefully, because he says American troops in Poland aren't evidence of a partnership, but a vassalship.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yet another example, right? What does Poland get out of this? I think they're realizing that the concessions that they have to make for supposed security from Russia is maybe not worth it. Um, I'm sure he'll be reprimanded in one way or another, but that's very interesting. A general to say this.
Yeah,
Honestly, I'm honestly surprised.
this isn't a retired general. This isn't a politician. This isn't a lower ranking officer, for example, such as a colonel. This is a general. And look, I say this about the United States, especially post Cold War, but pretty much any country. Your top brass, if you get to that highest rank in the military, you're likely there for political reasons. And if he's
Yes.
there, I think that's very telling about not only the direction the Polish people want to go into, but the direction that the Polish government's starting to going. Now, of course, military officials, at least in the United States, I imagine it's probably a universal thing, are pretty limited on what they can say politically and in terms of their personal opinion. So he probably got clearance from somebody or another to say this.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I didn't know if he just went off. And I think it might be safe to presume he's not the only one who's thinking this within the military top brass. Maybe he's seen one too many, pride parades taking place. So
Yeah, or maybe I mean, it could be just the thought that he can't stomach the thought of the war with Russia. He can't imagine. I mean, because you have to imagine somebody, especially a Polish general, probably all day is running war games and simulations of what a Russian invasion of Poland would look like. And again, American troops, clear provocation there. So he probably can't stomach the thought of a war in his country. I mean, you'll see this a lot, especially among retired military officers. They're usually some of the biggest peaceniks out there because, again, they've been in the system. They've seen how it works, and they see a lot of the corruption, a lot of things that bog it down. And considering the fact, again, he's still an active member of the military, I'm I'm a little bit surprised he said this. Now, again, I don't know whether he said this off the cuff, but I'm assuming it looks like the picture they have, and of course the article's in Polish. I had to translate the headline. I'm not going through the trouble of translating the whole article. It looks like he's on a radio or TV interview. He's sitting behind a banner with a like a logo, and he's in front of a microphone in uniform too. So, but I yeah, I did think that was interesting. We could see that shift again. Poland has been a bit more conciliatory towards Russia in recent years, and yeah, again, that's something to keep our eye on. Now, while we're in
I mean, I
upside,
just I would just like to add one thing. I think
go on.
you see two parallels developing. On the one hand, you see a kind of a globalization occurring. It's been going on in a very heated pace right now for the last 20, 25 years. But at the same time, you see another.
development, and that's the question of nation states. Um, Nation states are, more likely to remain despite this, simply because the previous era was about empires. So, an empire like, say, the Russian Empire would have less than 50% of it were actual Russians. They came from all kinds of backgrounds: Polish, Lithuanian, Kazakh, Georgian, what have you. Um,
Yeah, I think Ukrainians were like 20% of the empire at some point. I mean, funny enough, I'd hate to do this, but I was actually playing Victoria 2 the other day, and I was playing as Russia. And, those games are pretty historically accurate from what I've seen. And you can go in the demographics of your empire. It was like 48.7% Russian, and then like all these, like, just several ethnicities. Now, again, put as much stock in that as you want to, but the point stands. And yeah, we are in the nation state era where even if they aren't independently governing themselves, they're going to act as client states. They're going to act as satellite states. They won't become subsumed by a larger empire.
right, where they all have to learn the language and they'll change their names and so on. Like, I do think that has happened. That this era has occurred. I don't know how long it will last. I don't have a crystal ball for that, but I think it has outlived several challenges to it. So, from, say, the perspective of Russia, I don't think they see what would be the benefits about becoming an empire again.
Yeah, I mean, if they can lease ports in Syria or Cyprus or wherever, or for example, if China can lease ports in Africa, or if you can rent them, if you can sign contracts that allow your troops to be there, sign economic contracts, give your country certain privileges in trade, there's really no reason to go for overt imperialism.
Right. So, and it's also in people's consciousness, right? It's, I think, um, in the 19th century, I think you could say that might have been like the last era where, the notion of empire was the de facto normal notion to have. And even, the victors of World War One and Two, take Britain, for instance, it ceased to be an empire. So, I think that idea of the nation state now is even stronger than it was 100 years ago, 130 years ago. And I don't see that really slowing down. Its nature might change with respect to globalization and so on, but the actual populace, um, that wants some kind of self determination and does not want to. I mean, we could apply this to the Austro-Hungarian Empire and so on, right? Um, I don't see that changing, and so there's something about the consciousness of people that has changed. That I think that's in the equation of Russia and other European countries, that it's going to be fruitless to try to um, take over other people and assimilate them and see how long that lasts and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think we saw that even as far back as the Cold War, where it wasn't like if there was an invasion of the country, it was to set up an allied government rather than an actual annexation and incorporation into your country. But moving on from that, while we're in a bit of upside down world with Polish comments on Russia, uh, Serbian president accuses Russia of spying. Now, this is a quote. Moscow is actually regarded as a close ally of the Serbs, but now suspicions of spying clouded the relationship massively. President Vucic turned to the Kremlin and asked, visibly moved, why? Now, this is from Der Spiegel, so it was translated, so the wording was a bit off. And again, you could also assume the reporting, with it being a more left wing liberal German publication, it may trump up what actually happened, but it is interesting, especially considering the fact Serbia has been at a bit of crossroads whether they're going to stick with their historical allies, the Russians, and move more eastward. Now I know they've had some deals with China and with some Chinese either police or military patrols with some agreements there, and then of course they're also being courted by the West, by the European Union, by NATO, which I think that's probably the second greatest prize they could get in terms of subduing a a country formerly in Russia's sphere. I think Ukraine is probably the number one for them that they want to have fully integrated. But I think Serbia is a close second. They would take over that. More for symbolic reasons than Ukraine. Granted, Ukraine again. We went into some of the stuff with how they're pretty much being pillaged, but I do think it's interesting. I can understand why. Yeah, Russia is probably ramping up spy operations in order to offset some of this growing Western influence with some of these protests. I believe Serbia actually has an election coming up in 2020, so that may be part of it. That yeah, I think Russia is getting a little nervous about what's happening in the Balkans, especially with Serbia.
Right, and Macedonia has caved. Montenegro a few years prior caved, and it's going on and on. But also this apprehension in the EU of including them in the EU. I do want to go back to something that happened quite a long time ago in 2002, and something similar along these lines occurred with Momcilo Perisic. Momcilo Perisic was a guy that basically gave away state secrets to a CIA agent named John Neighbor. Why do I think this is kind of not the same thing? For one, this video is from December 2018, so somebody has, stayed, has waited at an appropriate time to release this video. The video comes shortly after Serbia has signed a contract for the S-400 system, right? So there's a bit of skepticism, and lots of Serbs will say, like, do you have any idea how many Serbs would give away information to the Russians for free? They only make Anglo-Saxons pay for this stuff. Like the sentiments towards Russia are that strong with the average Serb. So this in Serbia, there's quite a bit of skepticism about this, and most people are either happy to ignore it or just kind of unhappy about it. And that's not necessarily like an indication that what has transpired, is real, or because the videos were uploaded by, accounts that just popped up. There's no one that it can be traced back to, and so on. So, how much of this is likely, I don't know. There's other people involved in this with people like Billingcat, who worked in the 2013 data to fabricate the idea that the Assad in Syria was using chemical weapons in Ghouta. Billingcat was also behind the story that the Russians must have been the ones that shot down the MH17. So there's people that are, not to mention those two Russians in the Salisbury Skripal case. So people are already suspect about this. I haven't seen the Western media jump all over this either. That could be because they have like a hands-off kind of an approach with regards to Serbia.
Yeah, I think especially in the Anglosphere media, they're banking on a quiet integration of Serbia, whereas the German media, for example, again, this came from Der Spiegel, will point this out, and I haven't seen anything out of the French media about this, but yeah, definitely. And I would say one of the things that could backfire for this in terms of the Russians is after of course, the Yugoslav wars. I wouldn't say it's like a majority, but a significant amount of Serbs have a feeling of betrayal towards Russia. They don't hate Russia, for example, as they might do in Poland or Ukraine or some of these more westward Slavic countries. But they do have a feeling is where was Russia for us when we really needed it. And I think this might bolster it, at least among some segments of the population. Like, look at this so-called ally. Not only did they let us down then, they're now spying on us. But I could see them trying to play up that narrative, at least some of the more Europhile members of the government or foreign media. But
it'll have traction with them. But honestly, I think most Serbs understand that Russia could not support them to the extent that was wanted. during the two Balkan wars in
Yeah,
the 90s.
definitely. But I
Um,
I still think there's
and then
contention.
from my own experience, I've literally come across Russians who've like old timers on the street who've sat with and spoken and had coffee. I'm not kidding you. Who have like literally almost been in tears, telling me, "I'm sorry we couldn't come and help you." I mean, they did. Forces did go in, but that did manage to accomplish a few things in Kosovo. However, the slow grind towards Western power continues, and it may so for quite some time, unfortunately. But um, if anything, I think this is somebody who, quite honestly, thinks that Vucic isn't pro-Russian enough, isn't Eastern enough. Let's also remember that they signed the Eurasian deal too. Basically, the only country west of Belarus that has signed on to this.
Hmm. But I figured that was worth mentioning, and I again,
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's like it has gone under the radars.
yeah, and I do have a feeling that again, as I said, probably not in the Anglosphere, English speaking media, but in some of these other European media spheres, that they're really going to run with this narrative and try to push for European integration on that note. But
Yeah, yeah, they'll use this absolutely.
oh yeah, but moving on from that, I have some news about the UK elections. Let's see, we're about I believe 3 weeks out. Yeah, just to check the calendar. Uh, yeah, about 3.5 weeks out from the British elections, and as it stands now, this is from YouGov from the polling period of November 21st to 22nd, 2019, with Conservatives at 43, up 1%, Labour at 32, up 2%, Lib Dems at 13, down 3%, the SNP, Scottish Nationalist Party, at 4%, staying stagnant for the last polling period. Um, Correction, this polling period is from the 25th to 26th, whereas the previous one is from the 21st to 22nd. So, but Greens at 2%, which is down 2%, and Brexit, which is at 4%, which is up 1%. So, no solid majority so far. Now, I've seen some polls go and say that the Conservatives can pull an absolute majority, and of course, this doesn't account for all the parties. There's several smaller parties that'll pick up a seat or two, a few percentage points in the polls in the elections. But yeah, it's looking like it's going to be probably at the very least, a conservative coalition government with other right wing parties, whether that be, dare I say, the Brexit Party, the Democratic Unionist Party, these other various smaller right wing parties, quote unquote right wing parties. But I do think that's interesting. That um, I figured, as unpopular as both figures are, that Corbyn would still probably have a better chance because of how much deliberation there's been on Brexit, that people would start to begin kissing the ring. And what we've actually seen is, at least according to this polling data, is that the Labour Party is losing points to the Liberal Democrats.
Right. I mean, I've seen reports saying that Corbyn is catching up to Boris. I don't know what to say. There's all kinds of speculation about that, and of course, Britain right now is embroiled in this. Who's more anti-Semitic, who's more Islamophobic argument.
Yeah,
The Labour Party.
I saw that
It's
tweet too. Yeah, yeah. Oh, they're Hindu phobic. Oh, they hate trans people. They hate women. Yeah, they hate black people. This spiral of who is the biggest bigot and why we're so much better and anti-racist, anti-sexist, and anti-homophobic and whatever than the other guys.
right. It's just so depressing. Who's actually most pro-British? Of course, they'll argue, well, those are just sets of values. Meanwhile, the Magna Carta is up for sale to buy homes for new immigrants. I kid you not. Um, so indeed, a country of values.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the people are right. It used to be an exaggeration and joke when they said The UK is just a mini America in Europe, and at this point, it's come full circle to the point where it is even down to the political sphere. I mean, you can look. I don't want to stretch too far, but yeah, Boris Johnson looks like the Walmart brand of Trump, whereas Jeremy Corbyn looks like like Bernie Sanders turned into a twig and grew a little bit of facial hair. And like make as many jokes as you want to about that, but it has become a microcosm of just U.S. politics, and the entire Anglosphere has. Whether you go to Australia, New Zealand, the UK, I'd say New Zealand's a bit more lefty than the rest of the Anglosphere, which a bit of an oddity, but whatever. The current Prime Minister of New Zealand, we got into last week with a little bit of the British news there, but yeah, it is. Again, I don't have high expectations for either one, either way. Again, if Boris stays in power, if Corbyn comes to power, I don't see much changing. Now, eventually, Brexit will happen, even if it is just the Jupiterian president Macron himself just exiling the British from the European Union. But it, it will happen some way somehow. And my recommendation to our British viewers now, of course, being in the UK, and with some of the ways they're doing it, it might not be possible. I would personally go for the Brexit Party just because why the hell not at this point? If not, I would swallow it and vote for the Conservatives I just because there's not there's not many other options there. But again, or you could just yeah, you might want to sit this one out. That would honestly be my advice because, like I said, it's going to happen eventually under some circumstances, and I don't really see much of a difference between the two leaders. Neither of them are impressive to say the least.
Right, and Corbyn has come out and say, yeah, he's going to work on a better deal. I'm with you. I tend to think that the UK leaving the EU is going to be something that'll be instigated by the EU rather than depending on whether Corbyn is in power or not, or Johnson for that matter.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And yeah, like I said, I think it's going to get to the point where they're going to get kicked out before they actually even get themselves out.
Yeah.
But moving on from that, we have a little bit of European news. A couple things about I would say waning American liberal European Union influence. Now, first we'll start out with this little graphic about currently the U.S. nuclear umbrella plays a crucial role in Germany. Now, this is a poll from, of course, the German public, and the question went: should Germany continue to rely on the U.S., which had 22% support, seek nuclear protection from France and the UK, highest at 40% support, develop its own nuclear program at 7% support, or forego nuclear protection altogether at 31%. So, again, we're seeing this growing rift. Germany's been one of the key players in cooperation with Russia and Europe. Again, we've seen this especially in energy trade, which it is one of those odd relationships where geopolitically they are opposed to each other, but economically they seem becoming more and more intertwined. It is interesting the fact that, yeah, of course the number one option is seek nuclear protection from fellow European powers, but I do think it's surprising that more Germans want to completely forego it rather than rely on the United States. I mean, again, we were getting into this that things have become so shifted just in the past 2 3 years, and I would say even regardless of Trump at this point, as I was saying earlier, that yeah, rather than deal with the fickle nature of the U.S., how much it changes from administration to administration, and how its power seems to wane no matter what, they would rather take their chances than go with the support of a country that's been there for 70 years, which I think it sort of goes back to, you look at the unofficial founding statement of NATO, it's to keep the Americans in, keep the Russians out, and keep the Germans down. I think Germany's catching on to that, and it's been almost 80 years that, yeah, they're trying to keep the Germans down. So,
Yeah, I mean, Merkel had a bit of a tantrum this week. She was in a meeting with Stoltenberg,
And she said, "I understand your desire for disruptive politics, but I'm tired of picking up the pieces. Over and over, I have to glue together the cups that you have broken so that we can sit down and have a cup of tea together." It's the most burger thing I've ever read. Anyhow, that she was referencing Macron. And, Macron's criticism, if anybody read The Economist, was basically like, why did Blumph leave Syria? Well, of course, they didn't leave Syria. They just went on to, control the oils, the oil refineries and the drilling sites. Uh, I guess a better way to phrase that is, why did he abandon the Kurds? And so, we might think that Macron is like maybe our guy, but not. He isn't really. He just does some things that kind of play out in a way that's positive for us. Anyhow, I see this too, that there's a struggle, with Merkel's health and decline. And Macron is still a fairly young man. He's basically dictating EU policy right now, but this is coming to loggerheads with Merkel, and especially with reference to NATO. Um, uh, with this meeting that they've had with NATO. Of course, there's the big one that's supposed to happen in Britain for the 70 years anniversary soon. Stoltenberg has come out and said that the French president has chosen to use drastic words. Um, Anyhow, so again, you're seeing this kind of internal bickering and internal fighting within the EU. The EU is not in the same sort of positive economic situation that it might have been in years past. We've spoken about about Germany, and how there's an ever declining growth that they're showing. By the way, Audi is going to liquidate 9,500 jobs within the next 4 or 5 years. So, yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and again, with the German economic report, it says that they've fudged the numbers where they have 0.1% economic growth, which means they're probably in a recession. They're probably entering the new decade in a recession. But you did point out again between these sort of um, change of words between NATO and France, which, yeah, the Atlantic Council came out with a piece pretty much denouncing Macron's statement, saying, "Oh, I can't believe he would say this about the European Union." Where, like you said, he's not necessarily our guy, but he is almost getting the Trump treatment in the same regard as, like, oh, he doesn't have full commitment to an American liberal led NATO. Where, again, at the end of the day, all he wants to do is supplant the American position in NATO and put France on the top of it, which I would say makes sense. It follows logically.
Right,
But yeah,
right. Now
at
he's
the end of
not
the day,
going to. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, at the end of the day, they're mad because he wants to turn it into a purely European organization and doesn't want America to guarantee Europe's security anymore.
Right, and just to uh, flesh this thing out about what his stance on Syria really is. His problem was, with the way Turkey and NATO have handled Syria, and in his estimation, this wasn't in Syria's interest. Well, I mean, his interest in Syria isn't Syria's interest. To be absolutely blunt about it, if he's going to be another one of those leaders that are going to bemoan the fate of the Kurds. And by the way, he's not going to be going to the anniversary, to the NATO anniversary in Britain. He's skipping this one out. His reason was, I cannot sit there and act like nothing has happened. I mean, to me, this is very funny. Um, yeah, like, does he really believe this? I mean, his criticism is that America should have sent more troops. Turkey should have recognized the Kurdistan. Like, what's going on here? Like, He's, you know what I'm saying? He's not offering a path here.
Yeah, and
He's
especially for
defending the
someone,
status quo.
yeah, especially for someone who's been so pragmatic, especially as of late, it does seem a little out of step for him.
Yeah,
But I do think it's funny we're living in a reality where Macron is being harsher to NATO than Trump is.
yeah, in a way that um, returns NATO to its to its foundation as a kind of Western rather than American slash Western um, imperialist project, right? Because basically what he said was, I'm not going next month because I cannot pretend that the U.S. and Turkey behaved in the collective interest of Syria, which which is so insane. He's basically like, what is he saying? Is he saying like Obama's approach was the correct approach, or what Hillary Clinton would have done, or what Blump was doing like a year ago? Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, part of me thinks he's just doing this as cover because he doesn't want to say I have fundamental problems with the U.S. and Turkey, so he pins it on the Syria situation because that's the hot topic right now. But at the end of the day, I think again it boils down more to his pragmatism. But he could have picked a better cover because again he doesn't. It does, yeah, it begs the question. Well, what's he proposing? Should we have continued the status quo? Should we have gotten rid of Assad? Should we? What number of things should we have done, Macron? We're
Mhm.
like, yeah, and considering the fact he's really backed off on the Syria issue since 2018, since about mid 2018, he's really been hands off about Syria. So
Mhm.
it is a bit odd, at least on that front. Now, I do have a couple more things, and just to close out our European news, this is from, of course, Pew Research, and this is, quote, people with a favorable view of right-wing populist parties in Europe tend to be less happy with the European Union. I would have never guessed. Now, I'm just going to go down a list of the countries and the parties they give us. So, in Germany, the ADF, 42% support, 76% disapproval. Sweden, of course, the Swedish Democrats, 52-81. France with a national rally, which is formerly known as Front National, 29 and 58. The Czech Republic with the SPD is the 35 and 62. UKIP, which I think it's a bit strange that they pick UKIP over the up and coming Brexit Party, 34 and 61. No surprise that they're not the biggest fans of the European Union. PVV, which is um, Geert Wilders parties in the Netherlands, has a 51-71 ratio. Um, Another Netherlands party, FVD, is 57-71. So not too much there. Fidesz, of course, Hungary with Orban, is 62 and 73. Lega in Italy is 53 and 63. Jobbik, which is apparently another right-wing populist party in Hungary, is pro 82 against 66. Slovakia, um, Olano, it looks like, is pro 84 and against 64. Now, for center populist parties, it's in the Czech Republic, ANO is 41-66. The Five Star Movement in Italy is 64 in favor, 54 against. And in Greece, with the left wing populist party Syriza, is 65 in favor, 47 against. And you may think, okay, it's the right left dichotomy that's really pushing this, but it seems like it's the country itself. For example, Slovakia, a country that could not stand on its own 2 feet if it had to, is more pro European Union. Countries like Italy, like with Lega, yeah, they're more pro independence. The UK is more pro independence from the European Union. So, especially Germany, these larger countries that are more self sufficient are more anti European Union, whereas these smaller countries, such as Greece, such as Slovakia, and yeah, the Czech Republic, some of these parties tend to be more pro-European Union and just want change within the European Union. But I thought it was interesting, worth pointing out. I do think again the left-right divide, classifying it by that, is a bit useless in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. I mean, I don't. I don't have too much to add to that myself. Yeah, I don't know what I can add to that. Uh,
those are the stats. This is where we are now in terms of elections. Um, Honestly, I'm sort of more interested in, like, I know elections are, indicative of, like, culturally where things are going, but and that overall, I think it's a good sign.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like even though a lot of these parties are pro European Union, it's not that they don't want the Merkel Macron European Union, as it were.
Yes,
They
yeah, that should
they
be,
want
yeah, that
they
should be
want the
stressed.
Salvini Le Pen European Union as it is. You see them actually, despite the polling numbers. During the European elections, they were making moves talking about building a right wing populist coalition within the European Parliament, which, again, I think, at least for now, is a more viable strategy than a series of independence referendums to the European Union, as it were. But one last story I have here is Hong Kong had its regional elections today. So we'll pull up the map there. Now, the pro Beijing party won 59 seats as compared to 298 from last election. The pro more autonomous party won 388 seats as opposed to 126 the last election. And the unaffiliated seats went down from 7 to 5 from last election, which I believe last election was 2014, 2015. But in response to this, Carrie Lam, who is the current chief executive of Hong Kong, who is in the pro Beijing camp, stated that she does not plan on making any concessions to the pro autonomous and pro democracy protesters, and that she viewed Sunday's election as a sign of dissatisfaction with the government's inability to end violent protests, which I think is more or less accurate. The fact that I think at this
Mhm.
point it's the fact that the government appears ineffectual. Now, in terms of what the Hong Kong people think on the ground, whether they're more pro autonomy or more pro integration with China proper, I honestly don't know. Any source you're going to look at is going to be extremely skewed. Of course, more Western sources are going to say, oh, they want to be part of the British Empire again, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, the more Eastern news sources, Russian, Chinese sources, are going to say, the Hong Kong people would love nothing more than integration into China. So it's I think it I think the elections are indicative more so of a failure of the current administration to keep things under control and failure to negotiate, which led, of course, to uh, massive demonstrations in the streets that we've seen over the past few months. But I would say your statement is more or less accurate. Of course, I'm pretty sure the pro autonomy sentiments are probably growing, whether that be organic or inorganic. That's a discussion for another day. But nonetheless, it's interesting the fact that it was such a landslide. Now, granted, it was a complete inverse of last election because the pro Beijing party had a lot more support in the previous election, which I don't think people's views would change that fast. I think it's probably a failure to lead, if anything.
It's possible. I mean, this election had over, I think around 71% turnout, which is the biggest they've ever had. The previous election was just under 50. I think it was 47 or 40 something. Um, if it's any indicator, Chinese news outlets didn't run this story very much, or at all in some areas. Sometimes only results were given. One source only had a statement saying that the votes are in, or the election is over, without indicating who won. Um, I agree with you. I think this is also an indictment on Beijing, and believe me, I'm not rooting for these Hong Kong protesters at all. As far as I'm concerned, they are all, future SJWs. Like, they're all. That's what they seem to me. Of course, America is backing this, so that adds more credibility to that suspicion. However, it remains to be seen whether Carrie Lam is going to concede anything new. I mean, there is no way else they can go. They cannot grant what these protesters ultimately want: separation from China, and that simply cannot be given. That's a red line. The other thing I'd like to mention is, I'm not saying that China is like a beacon of democracy, but the truth is there was an election, and the results are the results.
the West is very happy with. So I guess they're going to have to agree that, like, even China has fair elections, or they'd rather not mention that.
Yeah, it is a bit of an odd situation they have put themselves in, but yeah, again, it just boils down to the point where like, yeah, I'll talk about it because it's newsworthy, but I don't have the same interest in Hong Kong that I have in pretty much every other story we discussed this evening, or I suppose early evening or late afternoon, depending on whatever time you're listening to this. But it just again, I don't see the global impact of this. I don't see how this is going to have ripple effects throughout the world. Like, okay, Hong Kong, major trading hub. If they went down, if they became part of China, there probably would be a little bit of a dip in the world economy. Nothing to cause a recession. I think your concern should be in Germany if you're worried about another global recession. That's just my personal opinion. Of course, don't take my financial advice. If you make investments based on what this show says, I think I think it's time to reevaluate some things. But that's aside the point. But again, I can't muster the same interest in Hong Kong that I do in a lot of these other stories, even other stories involving China and their relations in other East Asian countries. I think them selling a carrier through the Taiwan Strait is much more significant, much more newsworthy, and much more interesting than the fact that Hong Kongers are protesting because they want to be part of a liberal system rather than a communist system.
Right. And also now that we see that like their votes actually do count for something, how communist is this? How much of this is, certain Hong Kong oligarchs that don't want to be tried in mainland China for committing crimes? Like that has to be factored into it as well. I do think the protests are just absolutely blinded and in search of like having an American kind of lifestyle or a Western lifestyle within China. We well okay Hong Kong, but you understand what I mean. Um, so yeah, like that's where I think a lot of this is coming from. Notwithstanding whatever kind of influence that the CIA may have in proposing that, because of course a lot of this is based on what they think life in the West is like, and that isn't to say that many of them would prefer it, but I think you know do you really want to go to jail because you don't want your kid to be trans? Do you really want that?
I would say honestly, we are pushing almost an hour and a half, so I'll try to wrap this up quick. Yeah, this episode went a lot longer than I was expected. I did expect a bit of a longer episode, but again, I'm wasting time here. I think the best argument for supporting Hong Kong is the fact that I don't want a bunch of Cantonese oligarchs from Hong Kong coming to the West. Yeah, so look. I mean, either they can stay in Hong Kong, they can sit in a giant Chinese jail cell. Just keep them out of New York, keep them out of L.A. Because the last thing we need is more foreign-born millionaires and billionaires in this country.
True enough.
But that's all I have to say for this week. Definitely an eventful week all around.
Yeah, definitely.
So we will see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Thank you.